Welcome back to the Federal Executive Forum on Federal News Radio, 1500 AM. I'm Jim Flyzik here with Rear Admiral Dave from Coast Guard, Gil Vega from Energy, Ed Roback from Treasury, Erich Baumgartner from Sourcefire, David O'Berry from McAfee, and Betsy Hight from HP. We're talking cybersecurity. When we went to break, we had heard from our government guest some of the priorities for the year. How about over from our private sector guest? Let's start with Erich Baumgartner over at Sourcefire. What are some of your priorities for the upcoming year here in addressing the challenges that are out there?
Well, thank you, Jim. As a leading provider of intrusion detection, intrusion prevention technologies, our priority this year is to expand that conversation with our government customers. We want to focus on moving to a new way of thinking about how we protect what's important.
Okay.
Moving to a new security model, what we call continuous protection. As I said earlier, infections and breaches are going to happen. It's just part of the day-to-day,
right,
what we have to deal with. Right? So stopping these attacks can't just be about detection and blocking, but also about mitigating the impact once an attacker gets in. That's a different kind of thinking for industry. That means needing to understand the scope of the damage, be able to contain the event, remediate it, and bring your operations back to normal in a good amount of time.
Right.
Right? And so this new model must be expanded to the entire network. Traditional networks, but also mobile devices, laptops, anything that connects to a network. You need to be able to monitor in real time on an active basis, right? So for us, that is the challenge now,
right,
is to work with our customers to get them to be thinking along those lines, not just stopping the enemy at the gates,
right,
but then how do I mitigate if
right,
in fact they're able to get in? How do I find them quickly and then remediate?
Right, right. The word resilience has been used a lot there, that a recognition that we're not going to stop every possible. In fact, I testified once on this and I was asked by a congressman, have you identified all the vulnerabilities and threats to your networks? To which my answer was, sir, in all due respect, I don't think any one person could ever answer that question yes, correct, because we don't know a lot of things we don't know. But what we're trying to do is to be in a position to recover from anything, the resilience factor.
Yeah, to discover it after it's happened and then be able to remediate and recover quickly. I think that's where the game is moving to now.
Right. Betsy Hight, how about over HP? What are some of the priorities that are on your list of to-dos for the upcoming year to address some of these challenges?
Well, there's no question that we're experiencing a new style of IT, and HP is committed to moving that ball down the field. So one of the things that we have an incredible ability to do is to learn good lessons from our current activities. For instance, we have more mobile phones under management than any other service provider today. We have hundreds of cloud instantiations in the field that we learn from every day. So we can take lessons learned from those experiences as we move into cloud, mobility, and emphasis on big data, et cetera, in a way that very few other organizations can do, simply because of the breadth and depth of our operations.
Right.
And so we spend a lot of time learning from real-world experiences.
Yeah, it's like a big knowledge-sharing process.
It is.
Learn as we go along here and implement best practices. David O'Berry, how about over McAfee? What's on your list of to-dos? What are the top priorities here for the upcoming year?
Sure, reiterating some of the things they're saying. I mean, McAfee, we've always covered from the endpoint all the way up into the up into the cloud, and so I think the awareness of the industry in general that this is an entire continuum is very important at this point in time, and I think also what Gil and everybody said also is how do we make sense of things that are out there,
right,
and how do we filter whatever you want to say, however you want to say it, but the correlation aspect is incredibly important in real time. So it's not just about being able to get data, and we kind of call it the death of the historian.
Okay.
When I'm getting security data previously, you told me what happened to me, great,
right,
that's fantastic.
Right.
But that's kind of like the CSI model.
Right.
If you see that team on site that something bad's happened, some
right,
dude is not having a good day.
Right.
We would much more rather be more like we would much rather be proactive and then build for mitigation and resilience, understanding that once you have that that quantified risk, that you can actually make some decisions to how to not let the horse
right,
get out of the barn so far.
Right.
So
right. I've been in some discussions about the world we live in, and The idea that we're living in a fifth dimension where time is approaching zero for decision making.
It is.
Where you need to be able in a position to make decisions instantaneously. It's not like we can think about that for a while.
That's right. And it's also, I think that's very important when people say that, it's about actionable. So I think a lot of times we get caught, like you said before, in the esoteric aspects of the plan and all these other types of things. But how do you get actionable best practices and actionable capabilities delivered to the endpoint? I don't really care what that endpoint is.
Right.
We're owned by Intel now and have been for a few years, going as deep as you can into the silicon to try to get ahead of this stuff. Beyond that, how do we get the root of trust within the identity itself so that the person, no matter where they're at, becomes, a digital citizen?
Sure.
And we've had this conversation. You were talking about their employees earlier, Gil. How do you keep them from being targeted? That's not just an internal thing. That's an external thing as well.
Sure.
So taking the concept of digital HMOs and how how do I really protect them even when they're not necessarily doing my work all the time, because they potentially become a liability that way as well. So there's just some things like that. So
fascinating. Okay, how about the tough stuff? How about the challenges? How about the things that are hard to do? The things that are still you feel like you still got to overcome in order to get where you're going. Let's start with Gil Vega this time over at Energy. Gil, what are some of the key challenges you face on a daily basis, things you need to overcome to really get to where you want to go?
Sure. So I think a key challenge is also one of our opportunities that I spoke about earlier, and that is making that problem smaller in a sea of information. I like what Erich said about being overwhelmed, potentially overwhelmed, and developing that intelligence-driven program. And making decisions at light speed, right? The attackers are attacking us at light speed, and still some of us want to call a meeting to talk about it. So we've got to speed up the time to reaction, and I firmly believe that the way to do that is to engage in investments that allow us to share information. Mm-hmm. Share information at machine speed and machine readable format. At Department of Energy, we've got a program that's been in place for about 4 years that we're about to supersize across the complex and offer it to our sector partners as well. That will allow us to do exactly that, depending upon how trustworthy the information source is that we pump into our system. It will allow our sites to make dynamic changes to their security perimeters. And take some of that human intervention out of the decision making, make defense a little bit more dynamic. This is a challenge for us in a stop and go era of government budgeting and our ability to make these investments. But it's an opportunity in that we are focused on making sure that we prioritize correctly the limited resources we have into the things that are most important to us. At the same time, I think it's a great opportunity for us to engage our national laboratories, which are, the national jewels of innovation in the development of the next generation cyber defense systems, and that's
getting proactive again.
That's where we're trying to be.
Right. Rear Admiral Day, what do you think? What are some of the tough stuff that you face every day that you need to overcome to get where you want to go?
Well, let's look at the story in the national highlights right now. The insider threat.
That's true.
That still remains a difficult challenge. Not totally, not overcomable, but has always been one that shocks us. But at the same time is, what kind of emphasis do we need to put back into this from a technology standpoint, from a cultural standpoint, that's going to help us, particularly with those high-level people that are engaged in our game, that have the greater access and the greater potential. That's going to be a challenge that we're going to have to continue to look at. I love to talk about particularly our critical infrastructure partners, and that's an area that we're moving out in, as well as a sector-specific agency for the maritime, and having those conversations that the Department of Homeland Security is striving to develop, particularly with the industry. And here's the standards. We're not going to make it regulatory, but how do you lead them to this voluntary piece? And it gets into the information sharing. Share information with us, and how do you take information that is a very high classification level and get it down to a tear line that you can share with industry partners. Again, that's a cultural issue too that you're going to have to overcome. So these are still hard ones that are being worked at, the insider threat and those conversations, particularly with industry in a non-regulated fashion to bring them to the NIST standards, best practices, and put those out there.
Sure, and I experienced some of those cultural challenges early on when I was in the White House working for Governor Ridge, where people think information sharing is easy, but when you really start tearing back and looking at the issues behind it, it's a very, very complex subject with a lot of issues that need to be addressed. Ed Roback, how about over Treasury? What are some of the big challenges and key challenges you feel like you need to overcome to get where you're trying to get with your programs?
So I'm going to step back a little bit.
Okay.
So I've been doing this for 27 years.
Wow.
Kind of scary. So one of my challenges is not
Well,
to...
we're thankful for your service because we need good people in these jobs. So it's good to know we've got a seasoned veteran there.
One of my challenges is to learn to stop looking into rocks, because every time I do, I see a creepy crawly, and then I have to do something about it. But I still do that.
Yeah.
From where I sit, the problems we've had for ever so long, we still have. Where I started in a foreign affairs agency, we were dealing with problems with typewriters and a supply chain issue. We still have a supply chain issue, only it's gotten worse because now we're talking down in Silicon. We still have issues with default passwords. The really simple stuff. Improper permissions, separation of duty issues, not processing audit trail information, not building security into systems as they're being designed, trying to bolt it on afterwards. All these kinds of things we've been talking about for 20 plus years, we're still not doing right.
Yeah, on that adding the security after, I once made the comment that I think it's disappointing that the term firewall even exists. Because if we would have built the systems to be secure in the first place, we wouldn't have to put them behind a firewall to make them secure.
That right there.
We talked, do you remember C2x92? That was going to fix access control.
Absolutely.
Have we fixed access control? I'm afraid not. So all of these challenges we've had for an awful long time, we still have.
Now, you think it's because technology has changed so quickly that it's hard to keep up?
But we haven't even fixed those. Now we have all these new challenges, APT kinds of things, and all these other kinds of things that folks are raising, we have in spades. So the problem to me keeps snowballing, and we can't yet fix the old stuff.
Right.
So from my point of view, I'm a little bit of a pessimist that we just have all these things. So the challenge is getting worse.
Right.
That's my humble opinion. I mean, we're now connecting SCADA systems to the internet and they were never intended to be connected to the internet. But what's driving that? Cost is driving that. We're dealing with connecting networks to networks that were never intended to be connected, and all the challenges that are resulting from that. Billions and billions of things being connected across the world that we never intended to be connected.
Right, so sheer complexity of these networks now makes them much more difficult to just get your hands around all the issues.
And volume.
And volume, and then someone else's, the way I talk about the ability to react in net speed, which other people have talked about as well.
Sure. Very, great points.
Very challenging.
All great points and a dose of reality. Betsy Hight, what do you think are some of the big challenges yet? What are some of the things that we got to overcome to move forward and get where we want to go? We've heard a lot already, but what can you add to that list?
Technology is a wonderful thing, but you have to stop chasing that little shiny object long enough to get your block and tackling really right. One of the ways industry can help our public sector colleagues is to automate a lot of that capability, to establish a process for the public sector to write in a policy into the automation, and when there is a need to understand someone who is attacking or a process that's attacking that policy, to simply raise that to a decision maker if necessary. But we just, the technologists of the world just love the next big thing. And sometimes we just have to stop and think about what is the basic network hygiene that's necessary to protect whatever it is that I need to protect. I would also say the next, a huge problem is that organizations don't take the time to figure out what they want to protect. So they try to protect everything, which is not achievable.
Right. Right, Ed, you have a comment on that?
So I was just going to add to that. So we have CUI coming down
Sure.
the road. So when we talk about what we're going to need to protect, that's going to be coming down the road too, and we're going to have 40 plus categories of things that we're now going to be labeled we need to protect in
Right.
some fashion or form.
Right. So just again adds to the complexity. Yeah,
Yep.
I know in the risk analysis in the early days, people would come in and they would start going systems, but you really need to step back and say, let's focus on where our biggest vulnerabilities are first, and let's try to address that rather than think we have to address everything right out of the box. Gil?
I would say also that the move into risk management, right, from a compliance-driven security culture in the government that's sort of dominated for the last several decades, if you will, that's not easy. That is hard to do at an agency like Energy, where you go from nuke weapons to windmills. You've got to make sure that as you develop your enterprise approach, you're not killing your open science mission that employs several thousand foreign nationals in open scientific research. Their measure of success is how many Nobel Prizes they win. If you apply that sort of nuclear security policy, you're going to endanger your other missions. So you've got to have sophisticated approaches to understanding your risk levels, and then accepting risk where you need to accept risk.
Right.
And in our experience at Energy, we've been focused on moving from compliance to risk management over the last 2 years. It is very difficult.
Yeah, I agree with you too. I was in some heated debates on this too. I mean, some agents saying, well, we want to standardize on one product for everyone. And I'll say, look at your organization. One product for everybody is going to be overkill for some, maybe not enough for others. I mean, I think you need a mix of solutions to address the various threats that are in your organization and the levels of individuals that you're trying to protect. One solution could be overkill for some people that rarely use a computer at all. Ed?
But you're also putting all your eggs in one basket. So if there's
That's
a vulnerability found in
Good
one,
point.
your entire enterprise might be at risk.
Right. Plus, you don't want to be relying on a product.
I think there's enough heterogeneous aspects amongst there and maybe not to be that big of an issue with that. But I think it all goes back to block and tackle, and that is that ubiquity and getting it out trumped security for the first 3 decades of what we did in the IT industry for the most part.
Oh, absolutely.
So what happened is I have a friend.
Everyone wants the next neat thing.
Yeah, I have a friend of mine, and I'm going to talk about this hypothetically, theoretically, but when Java was coming out and they were working on Java, first thing they did when it was too big, they ripped out the security.
Right.
So what you're trying to do is you're trying to go back and infuse a backbone at times into someone who is basically a jellyfish. And so that's a hard thing, but it's doable, like you said, as we go forward, but we do have to have the basic. Don't plug in 200 drives. DOE does some amazing stuff. Talking about a cyber neighborhood watch was something I looked at a number of years ago. I did 19 years. I did 19 years in the state government. It was like I sound like I was in prison. But but the interesting part about it was that sharing, pushing forward to the private side as well from the public side. Very interesting to us as how do we give you a correlated situation that allows you distributed threat visibility across all of this, not just for your sectors, but then beyond that. So that, and then work on, how do we handle the rest of it.
Great points. I bet there's been more than one solution that's been on the table, and someone has said, well, the ROI is not too good to do that, but if we do away with a little bit of security, and it won't be so cost to build, and we'll be able to get it done. And so what do we get? What do we get? We get a product without the security. Erich, Baumgartner, what do you think? Is there anything you can add to this dialogue on some of the challenges you think we still need to overcome?
Well, there are a lot of challenges. I think the one thing that we know is that there's no silver bullet, right? Attacks keep moving up the stack, and the bad guys are really good at what they do. And so I think we need to move people to understand that you need to think about the entire attack continuum, not just the detecting and the blocking, but then also how do I remediate afterwards? We know that bad things like infections and breaches will happen because all it takes is one phishing email to the right employee at the right time, and you're owned, no matter how many millions of dollars you've spent on the best firewalls and IDSs and all those kinds of things, right? So the challenge really for all of us is to think about, okay, how do we then detect and remediate? Assuming that the breach is going to happen, then what do we do afterwards? And the good news is that technology keeps moving forward. The bad guys use technology, but we do too. And in the sense of things like cloud computing and big data analytics, we can now pull together a lot of that information that resides within the enterprise and be able to do analytics in real time, and then do remediations and updates in real time as well.
Yeah, terrific.
Right, which
Some
helps.
great points there. I want to talk a little bit about collaboration and the future, but before we do that, we need to take a second break. You're listening to the Federal Executive Forum on Federal News Radio 1500 AM.